Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it's Friday, October the 17th, 2025. Very interesting piece in the New York Times this week about Trump. Apparently, Trump's allies push to bolster Putin-backed Balkans leader, a classic post-Bosnian civil war or post-Yugoslav civil war story of dirty money circulating into Washington, D.C. through Rudy Giuliani, of all people. It's a piece of a very interesting new book by Kenneth P. Vogel. He wrote the Times piece about the increasingly corrupt nature, perhaps, of American foreign policy. The piece also talks not just about the Republic of Srpska, but also about Albania and Brazil. And Ken Vogel is joining us now. The book was out this week. Ken, congratulations on the new book.
Appreciate it. Appreciate you having me, Andrew.
So, Ken, how different is this? I mean, every administration has to deal with foreign policy corruption of one kind or another. The story of foreign money in American politics is certainly not new. Is this in the Trump administration? Is it different from other administrations?
Yeah, it definitely is. The way that Trump has approached foreign policy, like he's approached all policy and, all of his life really, is much more openly transactional and unapologetically so, such that many of the pathways that foreign interests over the years, over the decades, have taken to try to influence U.S. foreign policy are occurring. There's just more access points for it. So, we talk about like the mindset in the developing world or the post-Soviet world or parts of the Middle East, where the thinking is like the way that you get what you want from government is you pay people in the government or you pay the people around the government. And in the U.S., we like to think, oh, no, that's not how it works here. We have the emoluments clause. We have all these rules on ethics and conflicts of interest and lobbying and disclosure and campaign finance. You can't do that here. And what I found and chronicled in this book is no, it's long been the case that there were Americans who were willing to take that money from foreign interests to perpetuate at least their perception that the way that they get what they want in their country also applies in Washington, D.C. That is, you pay well-connected people around the administration. And under Trump, particularly in the second term, the Trump's family and other people around Trump's orbit have done nothing to disabuse foreign interest of this perception, and in fact have really encouraged it through their various and sundry ventures in cryptocurrency and real estate and the like. We see any number of foreign interests pumping money into, in some cases, directly into the pockets of the Trump family and their deputies, Steve Witkoff's family, rather. And this is, it's hard to argue that this is not influencing the way that Donald Trump is approaching his foreign policy.
I want to come to crypto later. It's particularly troubling. But the subtitle of the book and a lot of the book focuses on this character, Hunter Biden, of course, who's anything but a part of the Trump regime. Why include Biden in this book, which focuses more perhaps on the Trump administration than anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to show the bipartisan nature of this phenomenon. I wanted to show that, when I talk about well-connected Americans who are willing to take these paydays from foreign interests to at least create the perception, if not the reality, that they have protection, they have affiliation with the ruling class in the United States. And Hunter Biden was one who was very active in this space for a number of years, mostly while his father was vice president, not while his father was president, going around the world and working for foreign interests that have a real stake in U.S. foreign policy. And it wasn't just U.S. foreign policy generally, it's particularly U.S. foreign policy initiatives that were pushed by his own father as vice president. I'm talking specifically about anti-corruption initiatives, which the U.S. has long pushed in some of these like post-communist countries and other parts of the developing world. Joe Biden equated these anti-corruption initiatives with, he sort of bullied some of these foreign allies, saying that like, you need to eradicate corruption in your own house, otherwise it's a threat to national security and democracy. And what I found was Hunter Biden was working for some of the top targets of these anti-corruption initiatives, and not just Ukraine, the story that's been told pretty thoroughly in U.S. politics, although I did find interesting elements that had not been told, but also in Romania.
Yeah, you had an interesting piece about Biden pursuing a deal, Hunter Biden, that is, to pursue a deal to sell land around the U.S. embassy in Romania. I don't want to turn this into another bashing Biden conversation. We've done enough of those, and there are probably too many of those recently. But I mean, shouldn't Joe Biden have just shut Hunter Biden down? Didn't he have any idea of what he was doing?
Yeah, I mean, it varies is the short answer as to whether he had any idea what he was doing. Certainly, he knew that he was working for foreign interests. He discussed with Hunter when he went on the board of Burisma, this Ukrainian natural gas company. In Romania, it's questionable what he knew, but certainly Hunter Biden's Romanian clients and business partners and his Chinese business partners who were involved in this Romanian land deal that didn't go through, they thought that they were getting something more than just the advice of a Yale-educated lawyer, Hunter Biden. They thought that they were getting the imprimatur of the Biden family and the sitting vice president for much of the time when this sort of cultivation of these Romanian and Chinese business interests was ongoing. And I think it's difficult to argue that Joe Biden should not have known and should not have shut it down, because certainly there were officials in his own government. I learned in the reporting out this story about Romania and about the, and for the book, who were concerned that this was complicating U.S. efforts to take the moral high ground when it came to fighting corruption, and was creating at least a perception in these places, in Ukraine, in Romania, that the people for whom Hunter Biden was working had the protection of the U.S. government and should not be messed with. And that is part of what these foreign interests are buying when they go and throw huge sums of money at these well-connected Americans.
Maybe the constant in devil's advocates, Ken, is not so much Republican or Democratic administrations. As you say, Hunter Biden was as guilty as Giuliani or others in the Trump administration, but the Balkan element. You write about the Republic of Srpska, this rumps Serbian state of legacy of the Balkan Civil War in Bosnia. You've written about Biden's attempt to sell land in the U.S. embassy in Romania. The third character in your book is someone called Strick, who we will talk about later. There have been headlines about him and his association with Albania. Is there a weird Balkan connection in all this?
I mean, certainly I think that there are parts of the world where this mindset, this ethos of pay to play is more prevalent, and therefore, there's a couple of factors that make for sort of a magnet for well-connected Americans to go overseas and seek these huge paydays from these shadowy foreign interests. One is like this mindset that I described, where like you pay someone who's close to the government to get out of trouble, to get out of either the government's crosshairs or to gain some favor with the government, or to just otherwise navigate the bureaucracy. The other is places where there's a lot of money and a lot of interests who have a lot of money, who fear that the way that they obtain that money makes them uniquely susceptible to prosecution or to sanctions and the like. And the Balkans certainly fits both of those categories. And so, yes, it was a magnet for this type of activity, as was Ukraine, as is, some parts of the Persian Gulf region, some parts of Africa, but certainly the Balkans is high up in that hierarchy of places where shadowy money finds its way to well-connected Americans.
Some things never change. The Balkans has always been a place of international intrigue. Of course, it was the stage in which the First World War began. The Chinese are investing massively in some Balkan countries, I think, including Albania. The Russians, of course, are intimately involved in the Republic of Srpska. How much of this, if it is dirty money, I guess it's real money, but it's certainly not money that's revealed. How much of this dirty money is being channeled through Beijing or Moscow?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to know definitively. Certainly, there are Russian interests that are, openly paying Americans to try to avail themselves of this sort of pay for access, pay for influence phenomenon that I write about. In fact, Robert Strick, among his current clientele, are two folks who were associated, who were like executives at Rostec, the Russian arms state-linked arms manufacturer, and they're sanctioned, and they're trying to get off sanctions, or they're maybe being threatened with sanctions and trying to avoid it in one case. And so, yeah, there's a big element of it. That I think geopolitical clashes are another key factor that drive this industry. And so, in the 80s and 90s, and even before that, one of the key drivers was the Cold War and the effort to sort of position some, sometimes unsavory and even brutal foreign regimes in the US's good graces by saying, we are your bulwarks against communism in whatever part of the world. So one of the characters who I write about, who's really a godfather of this industry, is Paul Manafort.
Yeah.
And Paul Manafort made a whole living and really created the model for much of this industry in the 80s and 90s by taking figures like Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines or Jonas Savimbi in Angola, the guerrilla leader, and saying, like, look, you got a reputation problem. You're brutal towards your own people. Got this sort of blood-soaked humanitarian, human rights violations laden record. But you need the U.S. And so what I can do, if you pay me, is I can take you to Washington and I can recast you as someone who's going to help the U.S. Stop communism in your part of the world, by using my connections. And he did that effectively with both of those two leaders, at Savimbi in Angola and Marcos in the Philippines. So now, the fight, to the extent that there is a Cold War, it's sort of more of an economic Cold War with China. Maybe there's a little bit of a resurgence of a Cold War with Moscow. And interestingly, you don't see a lot of the folks who have connections to the Trump team. They're not saying, like, hire me and I'll show that you're sort of you're aligned with the U.S. and against Beijing or against Moscow. It's hire me and I will align you with Trump personally. And that's what we saw with this Republic of Srpska situation and Albania, where the line is not like, I'm going to be on the side of the U.S. and against China or Russia. It's, I too, just like Trump, was persecuted by the deep state in my country or in the international community or in the U.S. If you can argue like that you were sanctioned by the Biden administration because you're a right-wing populist, that is the recipe to get in with the Trump administration through this industry, and not positioning yourself as sort of on the opposite side of Beijing or Moscow.
You talk about getting in with the Trump administration, or maybe the Biden administration. And as you note, it's no great surprise that Hunter Biden was selling access, as Rudy Giuliani continues to do. But I mean, for a state like the Republic of Srpska, which is a very, very small state, whose interests aren't entirely clear, or Albania or Romania, is this all a bit small potatoes? I mean, who cares? And what are they really even looking for in Washington? What would what would the Serbian leader of the Republic of Srpska the so-called Make Serbia Great Again, Milorad Dodik. What's he looking for in Washington, D.C.?
He's looking for a few things. Number one, he is sanctioned by the U.S. government. He was sanctioned initially by the Obama administration. Interestingly, the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, left those sanctions in place. Additional sanctions were applied under the Biden administration, and now he's looking to get out from under them. And we did see, I reported in this story, that there was a recent move to at least suspend sanctions against one of his top deputies, his chief of staff. And so he did get something there, but he's also seeking something that is sort of more aligned with Moscow and in Moscow's interest, which is to get the U.S. to kind of brush back the international body that oversees the implementation of the Dayton Accords. This international figure that's called the Office of the High Representative, they have ruled against Dodik on several occasions, said that he's basically violating the terms of the Dayton Accords. And so Dodik has hired a number of people with close ties to Trump to try to align the U.S. with him against this particular sort of interpretation and application of the Dayton Accords. Well, who does that benefit? Vladimir Putin has also been quite skeptical of the Dayton Accords and other international agreements that are seen as sort of part of the Western world order that he wants to challenge. So when this Office of the High Representative ruled against Dodik, and these rulings were upheld by a Bosnian court, who welcomed Dodik for meetings to sort of show support? Vladimir Putin in Moscow, Viktor Orban in Hungary. So you see the sort of realignment. So what they're seeking, the short answer is they're seeking some personal benefit, that being delisted from sanctions, but they are seeking a realignment of the world order such that the U.S. is not taking, by default, taking the side of NATO or these other international bodies and defending these treaties. And thus far, I should say, while we have seen some signs that Dodik's campaign is making progress in vis-a-vis the sanctions against him, we have not seen so many signs that the Trump administration is realigning itself and treating the Dayton Accords with increased skepticism. But that is the goal of Dodik and the lobbyists that he's hired.
I mean, there can't be two more clownish characters, Ken, than Rudy Giuliani, who seems to be always on the verge of bankruptcy, has been sued by everybody over everything, and Hunter Biden. Is the fact that these Balkan politicians have used Giuliani and Biden, does that reflect their weakness and the weakness of their strategies as opposed to a strength? There's a comical element here. I mean, if Inspector Clouseau was still around, maybe Peter Sellers could play Biden or Giuliani.
Maybe to some extent. However, these are not, these are characters who I've focused on because they have colorful personal stories that interweave with one another. However, in the Serbska example, which I write about in the Times and sort of flick at in the book, they've also hired lobbyists who are legit close to people in Trump's orbit. So they hired a firm, Dodik did, called Tactic Global. It was started by a number of close Trump allies, including this woman, Carolyn Wren, who is very close to people in Trump's orbit. She arranged a meeting for Dodik with Rick Grinnell, who's...
is that sorry to jump in here, Ken, but is this all illegal? I mean, isn't this what lobbying is all about? Finding influencers? And I mean, are you suggesting that all lobbying is illegal, or just what's happening with Giuliani and Biden and some others is illegal?
I'm not suggesting that any of it is illegal. I mean, as long as you register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, you can lobby for whoever you want.
What? So, I mean, isn't this the business that, I mean, politics is a dirty business, and this is just part of that business?
It's part of that business. It's part of that business that has shaped U.S. foreign policy towards, again, some of the, some hot spots, some spots like in the Balkans that are not necessarily as important, but you see the implications for U.S. policy towards Russia, towards Ukraine, towards China here. There's a lot of it. I mean, there's a famous quote I think Michael Kinsey, like the scandal is not what's illegal, it's what's legal here. So what I'm doing is exposing the ways that the system and the laws that are set up to govern this system have essentially weaknesses that allow people to act in ways that are personally enriching and that are anathema to U.S. ideals about democracy and human rights and freedom of religion and freedom of expression without violating the law. I mean, in some cases, they do come close to violating the law. Certainly, like Hunter Biden, did not register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And the prosecutors who were looking at his tax case actually suggested, in the case of this relationship with this Romanian oligarch, that he may have violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act. But the fact is, he could have done all those things that he did within the bounds of the law, and has not been charged with violating the law on that. There are some people who have done sort of similar stuff who have been charged, including Paul Manafort, who went to jail for financial and lobbying crimes related to his work for the authoritarian leader of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. But yeah, I mean, it's the scandal is what's legal, and that's what I'm exposing here.
So in the Balkans, for example, I would assume that the Serbian government, the Croatian government, the Slovenian government, the Montenegrin government, they're all doing the same thing. You're suggesting that they shouldn't be allowed to do that either?
I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just revealing this for readers and the public to be able to know who is shaping their
let's take one of the more palatable states in the Balkans. I don't know, Slovenia or the Czech Republic. They're doing the same thing. So is that worse than what the Republic of Srpska is doing, or the Albanians, simply because we like them more?
It's not worse or better. It's just that these are examples that I've written about because they are like particularly acute in the way that they reveal how influence is exerted in Washington. Yeah, sure. Japan spends a ton of money on foreign lobbying, and it's
or New Zealand or Australia or Canada or Denmark. Everyone loves Denmark.
Well, except for Trump, maybe, right? But yeah, I mean, that's a good example, actually. It's something that I wrote about early in the Trump administration, when Trump was making all the noise about annexing Greenland. Denmark was desperately searching for a lobbyist with ties to Trump because, one of the other sort of conceits of the book is that there is an official channel for diplomacy, and it is, allies and others are often able to avail themselves of it. But sometimes it falls short, particularly when you have a president like Trump, who is willing to, and not just willing to, seems to take glee in sort of upending foreign policy orthodoxies, and is willing to meet with Kim Jong-un or Putin in a friendlier way than other recent past presidents. Well, Denmark, a traditional ally, all of a sudden finds itself on the outs of this dynamic. That is the Trump initiated shakeup of world politics, and it is desperately looking for a lobbyist to help them open a channel to Trump, because it understands that its ambassador to Washington understood that you need to be able to sort of work this system, this shadow diplomacy system. And interestingly, he had a very difficult time initially as he looked for lobbyists, because so many who had ties to Trump were unwilling to take on this client that would otherwise be seen as a very safe client without a lot of reputational risk, because suddenly Trump has them on his sort of naughty list and is averse to them. And so that shows two things. Number one, Trump's willingness to shake up the world order. And number two, the way that lobbyists have played a role in this shakeup.
The title of your New York Times review a couple of days ago of the book is American Foreign Policy Really for Sale? Do you believe it is? Is this what your book is suggesting, that if you have enough money and you have the right lobbyist, you can buy American foreign policy?
Yes, and I don't think that like you have to look very hard to find examples of that. Like recently in the news of the Trump administration, I mean, Bolsonaro in Brazil cultivated people around Trump's orbit. His son was in the White House early in Trump's term, and Trump tried to use the levers of U.S. government power, that is the exertion of U.S. foreign policy, to try to back down the Brazilian Supreme Court and Brazilian prosecutors from their case that they were bringing against Bolsonaro for trying to rig the 2022 presidential election. So, like right there is an example. Nippon Steel and its purchase of U.S. steel. This was something that Trump had initially opposed until Nippon Steel hired lobbyists who were very close to Trump, who were top fundraisers for him, and suddenly they get approval. So, right there are two examples where I'm not saying definitively that the lobbying is what shaped it or that the cultivation of people around Trump are what shaped it, but these were things that were at one point seen as like averse to U.S. foreign policy interests, and then you had foreign interests that were able to avail themselves of allies of Trump to sort of do their bidding, and the policy was reversed. So, short answer is yes.
Some people might say, well, there's an ideological affinity, maybe even an ideological alliance between Bolsonaro and Trump. That's the first response. The second one is that America's always been doing this, especially in Latin America. I mean, there's such a long history of Central America, of Guatemala, of Nicaragua, of the Reagan administration, of Chile, of Pinochet. Is this, I'm not justifying it in any way, Ken, but is this any way different from, especially when it comes to Latin America, from, people talk about the Donroe Doctrine. Is it any different from the Monroe Doctrine or anything since?
I would argue that it is, first of all, I'm not saying, and I do not report. In fact, I report the opposite. I show that there is a long history of this type of activity in the U.S. shaping U.S. foreign policy. So I agree with you that this has been happening for many years, and it also I would argue that it has been happening in a way that has been in the shadows, that it has not gotten sufficient attention for relative to the significance of it in shaping U.S. foreign policy and world affairs. So this is my attempt to shine a spotlight on this phenomenon historically as well, like going back to even before Manafort, but certainly Manafort and the sort of, the creation of these shadow foreign policy channels in the Reagan and first Bush administrations are where I really start the narrative, because I do think that that's where we saw the emergence of this as like not the emergence of it overall. I think there's always been sort of private diplomacy, but the emergence of it as an industry that has made some very well connected people in Washington very wealthy, and therefore is worth scrutiny and transparency, which I don't think is always there, despite laws that are intended to enforce transparency around this.
Historically, corporations were always involved in protecting their interests. I mean, even the term banana republic, I'm sure, came from one of these scandals or controversies in U.S. involvement in Latin America. In terms of what you're uncovering in Devil's Advocates, you obviously write extensively about characters like Hunter Biden and Rudy Giuliani. But are corporations involved as well, or are they just bystanders to all this?
Yeah, I mean, corporations are definitely involved in trying to shape U.S. foreign policy. You see that with the tariffs. You see that with like other trade policy, and have long been. And, so too are foreign corporations. So like to the extent that foreign corporations are shaping U.S. foreign policy, that would fit more into the remit of the book and of my reporting, although I have done reporting, for the Times about U.S. like domestic corporations trying to shape U.S. foreign policy and obviously U.S. domestic policy, which has mostly been their focus. And, domestic lobbying by corporations gets a ton of attention. It's not illegal. The effort by very deep-pocketed corporate interests and wealthy donors to shape U.S. domestic policy, whether it's on taxes or exports or what have you, to their liking. It's not illegal, but it gets a ton of attention. So my effort here is to show, look, there is this parallel system where foreign interests, including foreign corporations, are shaping U.S. policy that hasn't gotten as much scrutiny. So that's what I set out to do.
One of the other main characters in your narrative is somebody called Robert Strick, Stryk. I hope I pronounced him right. Not that he's probably watching. Very different kind of character from Biden and Giuliani, who both seem rather clownish. Tell me about this Strick character, why you featured him extensively in the book, and whether he might be a little bit more chilling in the sense that he exists in the shadows in contrast to the Giulianis and Bidens of the world.
Yeah, he was really interesting to me because he sort of exemplified two phenomena. One is that he was kind of I don't say a nobody, but he was like a lower tier character for many years. He had, bounced around Washington and done some lobbying under the second Bush administration, but had kind of flamed out when Obama was elected, and bounced around doing sort of random things in the American West, opening buying a winery in Oregon, and starting various businesses that did not do well. And he was interesting to me because there was this phenomenon that occurred when Trump was elected the first time in 2016, where like he really was an outsider, and he swept into town without the benefit, or maybe without the baggage of connections to this sort of professional political class that had traditionally served as the gatekeepers in Washington, determining, working in the lobbying firms, but also the political consulting firms and PR firms, and helping to determine who had the ear of the president, not just determining who had the ear of the president, but actually helping to staff incoming administrations. And so Trump comes in with a band of outsiders and doesn't really have that. And suddenly there's an opportunity for people who had not really been insiders to become insiders, as long as they were able to claim some patina of a connection to Trump, which this Robert Strick guy had. He had served as an informal advisor on the 2016 campaign, working closely at one point with the one-time campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, and some of his allies. And so he saw a real opportunity when Trump won and came to town to come in and shake things up as a lobbyist. And he gravitated quickly to foreign lobbying and suddenly was collecting huge paydays. He got
you wrote an interesting piece back in, I think it was November 2024, about possibly his small firm averaged under $5 million a year for lobbying, and it would go up to $200 million a year in revenue, at least according to one person. So there's serious money involved here, Ken, right?
Yeah, that's right. And he made himself quite wealthy early in the Trump administration, representing, and this is the other reason I focused on him, is that he, initially he started and he's representing New Zealand, and he's representing, Bahrain and other places where you can say okay, this is a traditional U.S. ally. Bahrain, maybe a little less so, has some a bit of a checkered human rights record, but certainly New Zealand.
Okay, mildly, right.
And Strick soon came to realize that there was more money representing the more toxic and less aligned countries and foreign interests.
So what's this guy like? You've looked into him. Is he a rather nasty character? Is he purely entrepreneurial? He'll work for anyone as long as they pay him?
Yeah, I mean, he says, without commenting on his personal demeanor, he says and admits in the book that he would work for Kim Jong-un, he would work for the Taliban if they paid him. And his sort of thinking is, or his justification, I should say, is that isn't it better for the U.S. to have some channel of communication open with even regimes that we abhor, that are anathema to traditional U.S. ideals about democracy, human rights, etc. And that is a thing that I heard a lot from various lobbyists who I talked to, or who's sort of associates I talked to for this book, this thinking that we are performing a public service by representing these shadowy characters, because it's better for the U.S. to at least have some ability to communicate its interests and its wishes.
I mean, that's obviously on one level, it's absurd and distasteful, but is there any truth to that?
I think there is, some truth. I mean, Manafort really modeled this, during the Reagan and Bush administrations. Manafort at one point I report in the book that he was serving as like an unofficial back channel to the CIA during the, under William Casey, who was a close associate of Manafort's in, with some of these countries in the Caribbean that had terrible drug problems or were seen as like a source of the US's drug problem, exporting drugs to the US. And so Manafort served as, he represented some of these countries, and he was essentially telling them like, look, this is how you stay out of trouble with the US. This is how you get in the good graces of the US, or at least less in the sort of in the crosshairs of the US, by making these changes to your whatever the policies are, whether it's law enforcement or economic policies, to discourage the drug trade. And it's questionable the degree to which that actually had any beneficial effect on the US or their relations with these countries, but it certainly was, he would argue, better than having no communication at all.
Ken, the numbers aren't that large. Earlier you talked about crypto. There's an interesting piece in the Financial Times this week about the Trump family making $1 billion from crypto. And then there was one in September in the Wall Street Journal suggesting that the Trump family amassed $5 billion after their own crypto launch. Are we missing the bigger picture here? Should we be more concerned about the grifting, if that's the right word, of the Trump family in crypto than on the foreign policy front, where you're taking money from small governments like Albania or the Srpska Republic is pretty small potatoes?
I would argue that it's the same phenomenon. I mean, you look at what is the biggest deal that the Trump Trump crypto company, World Liberty Financial, has done. It was serving as the sort of financing agent for this $2 billion deal between the Emirati Sovereign Wealth Fund and Binance, this sort of once Chinese-based cryptocurrency trading platform. So World Liberty Financial was integrally involved in this deal. And, it's again, a situation where like this certainly cannot hurt and probably helps the Emirati relationship with the Trump administration to be able to have put this money in the Trump family's pockets.
Finally, Ken, the New York Times review were very impressed with your legwork, with the detail in the book. But one of the suggestions in the conclusion that they weren't entirely sure of the bigger picture, the message in Devil's Advocates. So I know you feel there was a message. What are you trying to say in this book? Are there policy suggestions? Are laws need to be changed? Do we need to be more aggressive in dealing with not just obviously Hunter Biden and Rudy Giuliani, but characters like Strick? What's the big picture in the book?
The big picture is that this is a way that deep-pocketed foreign interests, often ones that are not aligned with U.S. ideals about the way that governments and the world order should work, are influencing U.S. foreign policy and in some ways like U.S. domestic policy by channeling huge sums of money through through ventures that are associated with allies of the sitting administration. And so, as I talked about, that certainly is happening with Trump in a big way, maybe a bigger way than it's ever happened before. And these cryptocurrency ventures are totally a part of that. This is something that does not get as much attention as more traditional ways that domestic interests do exert influence in Washington. So my effort is to expose this. It's not to suggest some sort of policy outcome. In fact, I would argue that the policy, the sort of regulatory regime around this is going in the opposite direction. If anything, it's loosening under Trump. You see that Pam Bondi, who herself was a foreign lobbyist for the state of Qatar,
surprise,
she became before she became Attorney General. And one of her first moves as Attorney General was to say that we are going to decriminalize the enforcement of this Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is the one tool that is used to regulate and require transparency of foreign lobbying. So at a time when there are more foreign interests that are seeking to exert influence in the United States using money to payments to well-connected people around the Trump orbit, there is even less enforcement, and there are less mechanisms to provide scrutiny. So therefore, I think it's more important for the public and for journalists to shine a spotlight on this, and that's what I've endeavored to do.
Well, that's the Spotlight, Devil's Advocates, the hidden story of Rudy Giuliani, Hunter Biden, and the Washington insiders on the payrolls of corrupt foreign interests. It's already #1 bestseller on Amazon on political advocacy books. I'm not sure what that suggests, Ken. But whatever it is, it's an important book, and your work is incredibly important to tell everyone what's really happening in Washington, D.C. Congratulations, Ken, on the book. And keep doing your important work in journalism. We need guys like you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the chance to be with you.